start this week. Boom. Remote or not,
Mm-hmm.
yay or nay.
Okay, amazing quotes. There we go.
Or it could just be like, yay, and then I'll just end the stream. No.
Done. Yeah, this is an interesting one.
Well, you should start because
I was
you
going
have
to
a
say,
lot of opinions.
you just mentioned, like, before we got going, that you haven't had the context of being hired in remote. I guess everyone's got some exposure with COVID to working remotely, but being like, I've been in a fortunate situation where I worked at an office, joined a team at the same company. We worked partially remote, where we would meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays at two different offices because we were geographically kind of not that far, but traffic made it a nightmare. So
Yep.
we would meet twice a week, and the rest of the time was completely remote. We relied on the on-prem time as like the meeting time and when all the real discussions are happening. But now my latest job, 100% remote. It has a lot of pros and a lot of cons, and I think a lot of people don't know about the cons per se. Like, you get to figure out like a nice routine for yourself, which might not be possible if you're working in an office block and there's nothing around you. You can't really do anything except for work. Like, you can't go to the shop or go grab food or anything like that. However, the disadvantage is if you're in tech, for instance, and there's, say, food on campus, you lose out to that. So there's like the superficially things that aren't quite there. But
you gain by not gaining the extra 10 pounds of campus food.
Yes, that's the one thing as well. There's no comfort eating that takes place. So there's that. The interesting ones that I've found is, how do you virtually reproduce hallway conversations? How do you somehow stimulate that like spontaneous, unplanned conversation? That I have not found a proper fix for. We're trying to achieve it by having these sort of breakout sessions with training, where you do a training session. It's like, we've just gone through this HR policy when you're onboarding. Break out into a room of 6 random people, or you get assigned. Talk to them, remember who you spoke to, and then reach out to them later on. And it's entirely, the onus is on you, which is interesting.
I have a theory on this stuff.
Yeah.
Less about the breakout session, more about the disadvantage. And my theory is, I think this is what happens when companies sit in the hybrid spot, is you don't double down on making a solid 100% remote company and ironing out the tools and the policies that really need to be okay. Actually, forget the policies, just the tools and process is what I'm talking about. Because I think people fall back on, oh, well, no worries. Like, you, for the really critical things, you could just book time and plan it out to go into the office. And right there, you know that like you've created a different tier of employees too, because there are going to be people who don't have that option at all, because they actually are remote and too far to get to the office.
Yep.
And, you know, you don't fix the other tooling and process then.
Yeah.
Because there's a subset of people who are like, no, this is great. This is working fine. So that's my opinion on that. It's like, I think a lot of companies are going into this hybrid middle ground as a compromise of like, look, we have options and flexibility, and you pick it and you choose it. And I think long term, that's going to be detrimental to some places. Like, it's actually, and what I really don't want is people go, see, this doesn't work out. This is why we need to go back to in office. And it's like,
no. It's, I absolutely agree with you. There's a big distinction between remote. You can be in the one model or the other model. The hybrid approach is probably the most difficult. The hybrid approach is exactly what you're saying. Well, the disadvantage, in my opinion, with the hybrid approach, I experienced with my previous company, which led to this. We meet on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Awesome. That's super beneficial. However, because 80% of people are there in person, the one person who's put in the meeting room, in the, like, literally in the form of a laptop being put in the corner, is like, kind of aim it at the whiteboard and hopefully you can have as much input. the audio is shitty. The whiteboard's this weird pixelated space that's kind of half glary, half not. You can see something. So that model, in my opinion, leads to this. The people who are there in person have a tremendous advantage over the people who aren't, because there's no tools in place to allow for real remote communication.
Well,
And that's, yeah.
I was going to say even furthermore, because I think when companies say hybrid, they're falling back on like, oh, we used to do it this way anyways.
Mhm.
But further to my point before, it's, yeah, there was a time when people had the option of coming in or not. But now, for most companies, they did not have a situation where you're like, yeah, but Janice is like 900 miles away from the
Yep.
closest office. There is no going into the office. So it's not like,
It's not even feasible for those
as
people.
the prior companies, it's like, yeah, but we were already kind of hybrid. Engineering was only coming in the office like 2-3 times a week. But that's very different than, no, there are going to be a subset of employees that just will never have, outside of like, huge events or quarterly things or whatever the company
Yeah.
organizes, to
Mhm.
be in the meeting. And I do agree that I think it gives an advantage to those willing to go into the office.
Yep.
And I don't know if that's a good or bad thing. I mean, I guess it depends on which way you look at it. Like,
Yeah, I think it depends on the company culture. I'm convinced that there's a benefit, and it's purely like anecdotal, like seeing some things happen where if you're the person, you can be junior, like significantly more junior than other people on the team, and your cube is right outside your manager's office. They walk past and go, hey, what's the progress on this? You suddenly get significant face time, which other people might not be getting, because all those people are, yes, there's always going to be that weird super senior architect that everyone has awareness of, and they've never actually been seen. Like, they're very remote. Like, I've been in teams where I've never met the person who's making some of the final calls, and those people I think are safe. That middle ground where you're like middle tier to senior dev and you're not in the office, the person who's right there who can give your boss that answer when they're walking out to grab lunch or like anything like that, that is golden opportunity for you to get attention and to have these passing conversations and to make far more headway in kind of the social aspect of it. So I wonder if people are going to look at it in the future going, this company's got a hybrid model. I actually want to be there in person because there's fewer of us there, so I stand out more. And maybe that's a good career move. So,
well,
yeah.
I think I would not want to be someone entering the software engineering field right now
Mm-hmm.
in um, in a remote only company right now. I feel like it
Yes.
is tremendously hard, as you have already discussed about the water cooler,
Yeah.
general knowledge, general hearing things.
This. Yeah.
Also, like, it's a lot easier to stay in sync with your team when you're there. You can try and mimic it in meetings and whatnot, but I will say that I have seen this in discussion with other coworkers and other companies and various companies, that when you have this non full-time remote company, even if you have the tools in place, I think people hesitate to use them to their fullest capacity.
Mm-hmm.
They aren't trained in that sort of company environment. And what I mean by this, and the example I'm trying to get to is, I don't know. Well, I'm sure you have used Slack before, so
Yeah.
I can talk about this. Slack has introduced a new feature for video clips and audio clips.
Okay.
My personal example for me is like, I'm a company of 400 people.
Mm-hmm.
I have not seen a single person use this. And
Yeah.
it's because I think we are so used to being, it's socially awkward. Like, I've asked myself, why am I not using this?
Mm-hmm.
And you're not in that group setting of just talking to the person you want or the people that you want to, and or the overhearing kind of factor, and it, you almost feel like, is it socially accepted? Like, are we adapted enough to being remote where I can send someone an audio clip on Slack and that's okay, and someone doesn't get like worked up about like, oh, well,
Why?
this isn't text, and now I need audio, and I have to have a headset. And actually, I think Slack is nice enough where they transcribe with it,
Oh,
so you
wow.
could just read the text. Um, but I don't know, because then I feel like people just want meetings. They just book meetings. So I'm like, goddamn meeting hell.
Well, that's the other thing. Like, there's this weird transition that's happening in that direction. That's what I'm witnessing as well, where people are saying like, here's this on-demand video call button to any of your colleagues, whichever internal system you're using. Just phone them, pull them into a meeting, and use that as the impromptu kind of thing. If someone's following their calendar process well, if they have spaces marked open, then they should be available, or they should be able to at least answer you if you text them. Like if they're doing something critical and they could potentially block the time. So now this kind of process that's in place, that's how do you show people that whole like virtual headphone moment where like if you walk past a bunch of devs and they're sitting kind of curled over with their headphones on, they're probably busy, so don't disturb. But now you've got IMs that just like pop up and pop up and pop up. Some of the training we've been getting has been this cultural sort of how do you handle that situation. So they made statements like, find the questions on the public message boards first, well, internal message boards for the company first. No one wants unexpected messages. So it's disturbing, it's distracting, it's all these things that are disruptive. So set up a time through an invite if you do have like a thing going on. However, if you've set up context for the person, you're like, hey, I'm working on this. Is it cool if I reach out to you? And they go, yeah, between like 2 and 4, I'm good to go. Like, chat to me then. Then just jump on the call and have that happen. But it needs to be normalized to where those kinds of technology are actually being used by remote and on-prem people. Because if you're going a hybrid approach and you become the laptop in the corner and there's 4 other people in a cube, like actually working on the problem, and you're just this person, you're not getting that interaction, you're not actually doing it. So even if there are people who are there 2 cubes away from each other or whatever the case is in the same office, utilize the same methods and utilize the same technology and you should be fine. But like the sound bites and video bites sort of situational clip, I think it's one of those where you can't enforce it because it'll just be weird, but you can't expect people to adopt it themselves. So you almost want some kind of experimentation to say like, let's someone you're comfortable with, like, hey, I'm going to try this out. Let me know what you think. And like send them a voice note.
Well,
like, is that weird?
The worst struggle is when you just see like text back and forth, back and forth, and then like there's clearly confusion and there's delay, and then you're just like, fuck, we need to be in a video call. Like just stay in the video call until this gets sorted out. And because in person when you're in the office, this isn't going to be an issue because you're there and you see the body language and there's no delay. It's instant feedback.
Yep.
I don't have to wait for you to fully finish your sentence. When you're speaking, unless you pause and accumulate the entire sentence you're going to say, and then just literally just like say it as is, but usually it's an evolution, right? You're speaking through your thoughts and whatnot. And you're getting that information in bits and pieces as it's coming. And you can use like, if I said something wrong, you could be like, that's not the path we want to go. Stop. I don't need a paragraph novel about like the explanation behind that and what, like, so it's very hard. You also miss like the emotional and physical signs of someone struggling on something. Like I've been at spots where I sit down at my desk, I'm doing stuff, and then you'll just hear something like, and you're like, you turn over and you're like, oh yeah, you're working on that random bug. Okay, yeah, I've been there before. Did you look at XYZ? Like, once you're out of the office, like, and people will argue like, well, that's what stand up is for, or you could post it in the channel. But there are times when the person who just sighed and has struggle will continue going forward trying to get through the problem and will not stop and like turn around and be like, team, I'm struggling on X.
Yes.
But you don't get that anymore on Slack. You're not like, I don't get like an emotional pulse on Slack or whatever the messenger may be. So
yeah, that thing you just mentioned right now is something that we've, at least where I am now, they're counteracting with this kind of, it's not a process as much as it is like strong recommendation regarding the company culture with communication. And what they say is when you're communicating on a problem, whether it be on the public facing or like the message boards or a ticket that's cut or something like that, start with the context of what it is you're actually trying to achieve. And start with that and then progress to what you are actually trying to do. So the context is, I've been tasked with this thing. I'm trying to update a website to now have a spinner that loads rather than just a page that goes blank for an extended period of time. Because of that, I've looked at this library and this is the UI component I'm looking at. How come it's not behaving the way I'm expecting? If you start the conversation with the UI components aren't working correctly, someone's going to be like, well, that's weird. What browser are you using? All these technical things. Meanwhile, there's a totally different template that exists for that exact problem. And because you haven't started covering the context, we've got this X versus Y problem where you're talking about one problem and I'm talking about a totally different problem because the context isn't presented. So they're trying to do that. And I think that's a step towards the, let's stop this massive novel being written in chat of like, I've installed, like when people start going crazy and start dumping down like 3 hours of log files or like Java stack traces that are multiple pages. I'm like, what, where are we even going here? Like, can you tell me what's happening? Because that's a difficult one for new hires for sure. I think there's a lot of complexity with the new hire situation, but when someone thinks that they are just needing like a little nudge to get beyond a technical problem, and they paste an ultra generic like null pointer exception, like, what are you doing? Like, can we take like 5 steps back and actually talk about what we're trying to achieve here? So I think there's a communication style that's got to change, because I feel like that's the way we talk normally. Often some people will dive straight in, especially when they're panicking, and be like, this exception, I can't get around it. And the person will be like, oh, so tell me what you're trying to achieve. No. But that falls away with written communication versus like verbal and specifically in person. So there's that change, absolutely. And having a culture of it being acceptable to say like, tell me what the hell you're actually trying to do. So let's hopefully work in that context. For new hires, like another like anecdotal thing. I would go, in my previous job, I would go back to South Africa, visit the office there. I knew most of the people in the office, but they would be interns seasonally. And I would go sit there and be like, hey, what is everyone working on? They had no context as to who I was, what level I was, or what the hell's going on. In their mind, some dude just arrived. The entire office knows him except for me. And that included like the office director and seniors there. Is this person really important or really not important? Like, what the hell do we do when we talk to them? And the communication was very kind of iffy. Like, it was the first 10 minutes was this, I would normally get like a very formal, like, well, you see, I've done my PhD in this and it felt like a job interview. I'm like, what? This is not what I'm here for. I have 20 minutes spare. I just want to know what cool stuff you guys are working on. And then when they see my body language kind of drop and relax, there's a lot of nonverbal communication there that's hard in chat. I can't just text some random intern and be like, hey, what are you working on? Because they're going to be either freaking out about who's asking for status updates or concerned that there's some alternative reason for this being asked, not just my interest. So yeah, that kind of conversation has the opposite effect if you use like the typical remote work methods.
Talking about opposites, and what you were just kind of talking about, it triggered me to think about the opposite of being junior and being like super senior, super like exec. And I will say that this is probably why I also think companies need to embrace the remote more. Is it is very hard. Like, okay, we've had COVID for almost, well, the pandemic has existed for almost 2 years.
Yeah.
And when I get in meetings and people still don't have like headsets or headphones on, I'm just like,
yeah.
Especially if your company has like a guideline policy on like how to operate remote, and it literally says in there like, please wear a headset. But then you get in meetings where people still are like, I don't want to look dorky with it or mess with my hair. It's like, okay, you don't need a headset, but you need a proper setup. Like you need a real mic and real earbuds. Then like, it's not. Oh, it's good. And you're not on the receiving end of how terrible the conversation is, or how odd it is to hear yourself repeat it with the reverb. Like
it's yes, and they're sitting like, okay, now I'm just going to generalize bad, but they're sitting with the laptop here, and I'm talking into a person's nostrils, and this has been happening for 2 years. So yeah, there's etiquette that's just being lost, and I'm going to be honest and say the reason I got my mic was partially streaming, but the other part was the people who are the most audible are the ones who actually listen to the most. If you have sirens going past you all the time and wind blowing and the sound of all these things happening, it's noisy. Like by definition, there's less signal in there because of the amount of noise. So it's hard to hear you. And yeah, it's a problem for sure.
It makes me feel self-conscious right now because I'm like, oh god, is my mic up to standards? I usually use this for my meetings, which is like you can't hear anything at all. Like there's times where like my cast will be like right over here just screeching, and I'm like, sorry guys, and they're like, sorry for what? I'm like, damn, like this mic only gets literally what's in front.
No, but it's needed. It's basic things like that that's needed for remote work.
And granted, me and you both know that like there are times outside your control.
Oh yeah.
Like your kid comes running in a bedroom and is like scream like, okay, I don't expect you to have like the anti-kid noise cancellation powered by AI like that just filters that out. I get it, things happen, but like when I consistently go to meetings and there's like people who just still don't have a headset, I'm like, for the love of God, like you just need a headset. And I don't know why this happens still. And I think it's really terrible because I think it mostly happens, like I said, because companies are in hybrid scenarios and people are like, I don't usually have meetings over Zoom. Most of my meetings are going to be in office. Any of the critical meetings are just going to be in office. And this is something I've seen on like exec level and whatnot, where it's like, oh, my meetings that are super critical are board meetings anyways, and they're going to be in person.
So that's an interesting question. I think that's a really interesting one. Are we going to continually take that model going forward, where no matter how remote you are, critical meetings will happen in person? Because if that's the case, it's a variant of hybrid no matter what.
So I think I have no affiliation with this company, but GitLab is probably the company I could point to that I know offhand, where they are fully remote. And actually on a lot of stuff we're talking about, like when the company I am at went remote, I must have linked that thing 20 times from GitLab. They have a full remote handbook that is extensive.
Yeah.
I think it's 40 pages.
Wow.
Because they're a fully remote company. So they cover like procedures and just general stuff like etiquette, but also like all their tooling and how they operate and how you would like mimic things like water cooler, because they don't have the office used to have spontaneous. It's like, no, if we don't have a replacement, it is never going to happen, period. And I think the last time I checked, the only thing they actually have is at office in SF, and I think it's just for like the corporation needs an address.
Mm-hmm.
And like
Mhm.
I think they say like no one even works from there. Not even their execs go there. It's literally an office that exists for, hey, we're in the California state and we need an office to exist because
That's
state law requires it.
yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and I think it's doable. I get antsy when companies are saying that they're hybrid and then they will do something like move their execs like to HQ. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, nah, sorry. Like, you're a
It's
global company. Why does your exec need to be in the same area as your other execs? Like,
it's I think, at least for me, the concern there is that they are the ones who will have no tolerance and have power to fix process
mhm.
as much as we complain. So if they're meeting in person and we're going, listen, our video calling sucks, they're like, well, I don't use it that much. It's okay. If they're using it primarily as the way to actually communicate, then you're in a position. It becomes a bigger and bigger divide between the company, parts of the company that are doing the executive responsibilities versus the parts of the companies that are actually doing the other work. And if they're operating by a different set of rules, it's not really feasible. It's not. It's. I mean, obviously, it's not equal, but it's not going to be. They're not going to allow for the processes to be as smooth as they could be because
Yep.
they're not motivated.
Now, I've also heard, and I'm really torn on this, that Domino's, for example, what they do is when they hire you, you're in office for the first like 6 to 12 months.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's on like a 1 or 2 day per week basis.
Mm-hmm.
After that, I don't know what internally what they call it, but I'll say you graduate
Okay.
into a fully remote employee and no longer required to go in 1 or 2 days a week. And I'm torn because I like the concept of like you're new to a company. This is going to probably accelerate your learning. You're going to have
Mm-hmm.
an environment to go in and just I didn't do the camera stuff. God damn it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you get that in office stuff. You get these water cooler moments. You have like I personally would like that, but then I'm also torn because I'm like, no, I wouldn't go at a company in this scenario at all because like for me, like my work office is like 8 hour drive away.
Yeah.
Like one way. Like
Yeah.
there's
It's
no
not
way I can go in
feasible.
the office.
Yeah. So that's exactly it. Like you can't have that situation. I've heard of people having that whole earn the responsibility to be remote or earn the opportunity to be remote. It just reeks of micromanagement, some parts of it. Where they're like, we're going to make sure you don't mess around. I'm like, what kind of weird tactics do you believe work in psychology that if you sit someone down in person for a year, once a week, that they're either going to be comfortable working remotely or they are not. And they're either going to have performance days because they work like everyone else, or they're going to have an issue with needing someone there and needing micromanagement, in which case you can substitute it. It's that whole old school way of like, I have to be there in person so that I will be motivated to do work. I feel bad for those people because I think that's a different problem. But there's a lot of people who just pull that card for micromanagement. That's my personal opinion.
Yeah, like I definitely could see places doing that. I mean, I think it could be used for the good. Like you go in the office and like that day, the people in the office, part of the I don't know what you call it, the newbies, the new people,
Mm-hmm.
they all meet each other and you
Yeah.
cycle it like that. But then I'm like, why can't that be done online? And obviously it can be. I
Mm-hmm.
just think what happens is if you do it online, people just go, yeah, you don't need to go that, or my calendar's too busy, or I'm too swamped, or
Yeah.
the prod, or like whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's very easy to just punt it. Versus if you're already in the office and someone shows up and is like, "Hey, no, you need to be in this room
Yeah.
with everyone else and all the newbies." It's kind of hard to be like, "Oh, sorry, my calendar is full and I have a deadline." Like,
Yep. It's exactly that. And there's also people who try and fake that, where they'll be like, hey, we're lucky enough to have this senior person in our meeting today. And they're off busy working on something else. It's pretty damn obvious from
Hmm.
the typing and the constant muting and turning off their camera and all those things that they're there, but they're not. And those I think are a byproduct of not prioritizing the social interaction, because it needs to happen. There needs to, if you don't have 25 minutes in your calendar with 2 weeks notice, there's probably a bigger issue there. Like this needs to be prioritized. Like something that we're trying at work is they're trying to have these like co-working calls, and they're trying to normalize that. So like grab someone who's new and just jump on a call, and you can work independently, but your webcam's on and your mic is on, or if you're typing loudly like me, my mic is off, but they're there and you can chat to each other about like, oh, I'm still hitting my head against this. Like, have you spoken about this? And the weirdest part was you have a far more organic conversation with a person. I worked with someone for, I think, 90 minutes. We ended up talking about how their onboarding is going, where they're at, where I'm at, what some of their concerns are about the work they're doing. And then in between that, it was like, oh, what are you up to on the weekend? And you have this kind of cubicle neighbor relationship as opposed to just being some random person. So if I do this with enough people, my hope is that I can have someone to lean on to do that with regularly, because you can't do it perpetually with the same person because it'll just get weird. But the ability to be like twice a week while I'm busy doing some dev work, I can just have the other screen open and the person's there. But now it comes down to even more of what you mentioned, where people don't even have their own damn headsets. Now you're saying to someone, you need a second monitor. It's kind of important if you're going to do a work from home sort of work and someone you're co-working with. So yeah, that's even more of a requirement.
So, my personal take is that I think companies that are remote first and do not mix with hybrid
Mm-hmm.
might end up winning in the end.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what winning means. I don't think that means like all hybrid companies will die. It kind of honestly reminds me of like on-prem and cloud.
Yes.
Like,
Yeah. There's a lot of similarity.
You start something new, you're like, cloud is the way to go. Yes, there are some exceptions where like on-prem still just trumps. Like, oh,
Yep.
you're going to run Netflix and your egress is going to be too much, and okay, you're going to build out Open Connect on the edge of the network so you don't have to pay AWS for the bandwidth. Gotcha. But like for the bulk cases, on-prem is like a inefficient way. Granted, like I said, there's exceptions. There is the extreme tails of the end where it's like, no, you're so big you can't go to AWS, or you are in the egress of bandwidth spot, so you're not going to go to Google Platform Cloud or Azure or whoever because of the cost. But I think, most new companies starting today are not going, man, we need to rack up some servers in a data center. They're like,
no one wants that.
AWS or Azure or wherever, because like we like the elasticity and we like being able to spin up a bunch of stuff and not have to worry.
Yeah, there's other parts. Like, I'm just thinking about the similarities that you mentioned there. Imagine being a mega company that's got these facilities management problems. Finding buildings that are not like, hey, we need an office block that can seat 100 people. It's like, we need an office that can seat like 2,000 people. How do you even go about reinvesting in that efforts, or in those efforts, when you know that remote is okay? Where the remote processes make sure that their laptops are in the mail, make sure that they've got phones and have them ready to go, versus we've got like zoning laws coming in if you're building an office somewhere in the middle of nowhere and you're trying to be trendy. You've got all the like crazy facilities responsibilities. You've got all the admin. You've now created like what would be the equivalent of like a DBA instead of having a managed cloud database.
Yep.
And you've got a network person instead of having Like you've got network infrastructure people who are doing physical cabling versus like the cloud offering where you're just paying someone else to do it. So you've got all these things that come into place. Like yes, places like WeWork and stuff like that allowed for that offloading, but this also starts to become an interesting segue to what about people who want to work remotely but cannot work at home? If you're starting an entry-level dev job, you potentially living in a expensive metropolitan area, and now you have potentially a child or pets or spouse in a small 2-bedroom place or a 1-bedroom place, you don't have the luxury of like a home office. Now you into a weird situation where there's been those stories of people like, I've worked from my sofa with my laptop. Like I would die. Like physically I would be bent over and probably broken. So there are people who have to have some kind of office facility, and they're going, well, now I have to rent one instead of the company providing me one. What the hell's up with that?
I am so mean on this. I'm like, due to what you will save not having to come to work, you should stop banking on the company to offer you this 100 square foot, whatever, 50, whatever, 20 square foot area for you to have a dedicated desk and actually have an office. And there's always an argument of like other things like, I can't afford it and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's the same thing. It's as commuting, I was going to say, like if you want that job and you can't afford to live close enough and you have to have the commute for 5 hours, you don't go and show up at the company and be like, look, I would love to work here, but I need my commute to be 2 hours. Like that's just outside the company's hands. Like, they're going to tell you, well, there's nothing we can pay you more money. And that's the same thing in this. We can give you more money so potentially you can get an office. And I look at it as an individual, I'm like, okay, so if I don't do this, and let's say I can't get to the office, because that was what happened with COVID. It was like some companies, you literally couldn't go in.
Yes.
So there was no hybrid. There was, you are remote, period, whether you like it or not. And then you have to look at yourself. How much is your productivity going down during that time of not having a dedicated space? And is that worth losing your job? And if the answer is no, then you readjust your priorities. You either move further out, or you reduce the cost of something to buy a bigger place, or you pocket out the WeWork. Well, I mean, in COVID time, you couldn't go into WeWork either, but like, you can
make a plan, in my opinion, because I felt like initially I was being harsh on those people. I'm like, yes, the pandemic is unexpected and all of those things, but now people who are voluntarily getting themselves into leases in like expensive areas, that's maybe not the right play. Why do you have to be there? You're not taking advantage of 90%. I've fallen into this boat as well, where we have a reasonable size apartment, but it makes no sense living where I am physically if I'm not going into the office. It doesn't make sense. Like the Bay Area cost of living is so high for what you're getting, which the benefit was to actually be like physically in close proximity. But now there's no
you know what's actually even crazier? So in Toronto, on a real estate to real estate cost, it is not more expensive. But what most people don't realize is when you factor out the difference of the salaries in Toronto to the Bay Area, the cost of living in Toronto is actually higher than living in the Bay Area, which is crazy. And I still know people who are like it's a different equation. If you want to move and your work shows up and they're like, okay, in order for you to move, there's like a 25% cost of living readjustment. Okay, now you need to reevaluate things, right? Like whether or not you should be asking for office space or whether or not you don't want to move and things like that. But if there is not a significant cost of living readjustment, then you should just leave.
Well, like that's exactly it. Like all of these numbers that have been coming out as a result of these conversations have been so interesting because they were looking at absolute numbers. And like what you said, your cost of living needs to be based on where you are making the money and where you're living. Just because the absolute numbers are higher doesn't mean that's the optimal place to live. Like, I'm sure there's way more affordable accommodation in a bunch of states, but the cost of living is going to be, it's going to have to be adjusted, which is kind of arbitrary as well, because right now there's no concept. Like, what you're doing is paying for me to be in a time zone, and if I want to work from 3 a.m. until like 2 in the afternoon, why is that a problem? Like, if I'm performing, then you should pay me the same as the person who's performing, whether I'm in this time zone or that time zone. So that is another situation. Like, if companies said that positions are posted based on your performance, have nothing to do with where you're located geographically, I think the entire world will change overnight. Everyone will be in so many different places doing so many different things because we could, but that hasn't happened yet.
I mean, I think there's, I, and maybe I'm wrong. I don't think we'll ever see it on like a global level of like, you're software engineer level 1, therefore no matter where you work in the world, it's gonna be X. And the reason why I say that is it doesn't work that way in general, because every single country has different like social benefits that have to be paid in, contribution matching, like requirements on the government side, taxes, like, but on a country level, it would not surprise me that much. I mean, a perfect example is where I am. It was you. So I work in Canada, and I can move anywhere in Canada regardless of pay, like no cost of living adjustment. So the pay is based off of the office of where HQ is when they hire, which is in my case Toronto, and it's like great. So from the business standpoint, you're already in Canada's like most expensive market to hire for the most part. Maybe Vancouver beats it on some stuff like game studios, but if you ignore remote, so you already know like a dev is going to cost X hiring in Toronto. Now, why do I care? Like, if I don't hire remotely and I hire where the office is, I am paying that amount. If someone does not want to live there and the company is still paying the same amount that they would in that area, the company has not lost anything. No. Now, you could make the argument that, well, they could find someone cheaper in a different market. But what happens when you can't, because the other companies who do exactly what I just say are there? So, right?
Yes, the argument that I believe for me, the argument falls apart when people discredit or devalue the mobility of people being hired. I'm not stuck in a state. I can move to another state. So for you to say to me, if I employ you in California, I'm going to pay you this much. If I employ you in New York, I'm going to pay you this much. And if I employ you in the middle of nowhere, I'm going to pay you less. Now, cool. It becomes a cost benefit value kind of formula for the company going, like you said, do we hire in New York? Do we hire in California? Do we hire in like Wyoming? So, but I can move. So it's not like I'm going to be better at my job if I'm in one state versus another. I can go wherever. So it's not costing the company anything. It just so happens that there are maybe more valuable parts of living in a state to me personally and to someone else wanting to live somewhere else. So that's the cost benefit trade-off. Like, if you want to live in an expensive state, this is what we're paying you. This is what we'll pay you if you were to move anywhere else. That's it. So when that happens, I think this conversation will change dramatically, where people will be like completely in favor of remote.
I think the argument is usually like how, why is X person making more money than me because they live in another state of whatever? I could understand if you're in the middle of nowhere company and you want to continue to pay middle of nowhere company salary, and your employees were like, hey, I want to move to the Bay Area and like I won't survive there. Like, that's not great, but the market wins, because what's going to happen is all your employees are just going to pick up and move to the company who's willing to pay the Bay Area and not have like, so I think it'll sort itself out. I think cost of living adjustments, like, I think they're like a sham, in my personal opinion. But
Yeah.
even then, like you said, you have to do the analysis. I know plenty of companies who do this, and you still net. You
Yeah.
still net depending on what state you move to. You're like, oh, great. Well, not great. You're going to decrease my salary by 10% moving where I was to X state. That state doesn't have state income tax. And you're like, I'm
Yep.
actually going to make more.
So
And it's like,
it's significantly more complex than I think people put value on. Like you're saying, like what is the implication of the money in one place versus the other? If I lived, say I decided all I want to do is save money. I have no intention of spending any money on any resources available to me. My cost of living does not change because that's an absolute amount. If I'm saving $1,000 a month because I can afford to here, and then you move me somewhere else and say, okay, we're going to pay you less, but your cost of living is reduced, but I'm only spending 10% of my earnings. Now my amount of money I can save is maybe only $800 or $600. So now I'm like, at the end of this, you're coming out
and
less.
it's way more complicated because you get into things like I don't even remember what it's called in the US, but here it's your registered retirement savings plan, which is based off of your salary. I mean, it caps at an amount, but you could actually reduce someone so like they don't get as much contribution room anymore because your total pay is decreased, even though the cost of living has decreased. And you could say, well, you net the same at the same amount. Well, yeah, but the difference is now that I lost that additional room, and it depends like how much you make and if you hit the cap.
That again discounts the mobility of people. I don't want to retire here. That makes no damn sense. So why should my contribution be higher here? They're assuming I want to retire here compared to somewhere cheaper. So yeah, there's a lot of complexity, but I think my like stance on it is we will hopefully get better with remote work. I have no doubt that certain companies are going to value on-prem way more for certain jobs where you're going to be like, I want this position. Where am I going to sit in relation to my manager, to my VP, to whoever? And if I've got eyes on me from like skip levels 3 up, then it's even better. Like if my manager hears about me from their boss's boss, then I know I'm doing something good or something horrendous, but that's something valuable. So people are going to value this whole putting me in a position that I'm away from the office. Well, sorry, that I'm in the office. So I think that's something that's probably going to go back and forth. But something we hinted at that I'm not sure of how to deal with is how the hell do we work with new hires? Because for me personally, I worked with a VP for 2 years. The only time I had interaction with this person was when shit was on fire. I thought that their natural state of being was grumpy. Like that's it. I never ever interacted with them besides when things were going horrendously wrong. And then you relocate, you meet the person in person, and you're like, wow, 90% of the time this person is actually smiling and really laid back. But from a new person's perspective, you never get that. So the same happens with new hires. When I was on the team that I was on, and everyone was doing the whole, oh, we're going back to the office in 2 weeks, repeated over 2 years, the new people would never get exposure to some people besides the exceptional circumstance when things have gone completely wrong. And that sucked because they never got on a first name basis with that person. They never got visibility. They were always very short with their answers because they were like, who is this person? They intimidate me. So that is a scary, and it might have been the byproduct of having like visible leveling that I'm now realizing is a problem, because you research who you're going to talk to, you see what level they're at, you talk to them, and you're like, oh god, this is terrifying. But the new hires never get the social aspect. They never get to see the technical lead of the team in an environment that's not negotiating trade-offs, or they never get to meet the project manager who's not arguing with your manager about timelines. It's the slices of interaction are so skewed and so artificial that it doesn't
actually that's a good point, because being in the office, at least my team would see me interacting with other people, and like you got an idea of like who stakeholders were. and you would always know, like, oh, a good manager shields me from that, so I don't have to deal
Mhm.
with that shit. But now it's on a whole other level. Like my team doesn't even see like who I'm meeting with at all.
Yeah,
So
exactly
it's
that.
not even like when I'm talking about like, oh, John over there is asking a blah. They're like, who the fuck is John?
Yeah.
Like they have no idea, like at all. At least in the office, like
Yep.
someone would come over and be like, "Hey, are you ready for the meeting that we have on blah blah blah?" And you're, oh yeah, like we
Yep.
just need to finish this email. You don't, and I guess that's just like it's all solvable. It's like, okay, you could have better visibility. You could loop your team into this stuff more often.
Mhm.
You could have a more open calendar, things like this.
Mhm.
I really do like the co-working concept that you had
Yeah.
mentioned. Um,
I had a great time.
my
Personally,
my
I found it very rewarding. But
my
yeah.
biggest fear is like everyone gets excited when this stuff first gets announced, and then it die down. Everyone goes like, "I'm too busy to do it," and like,
Yeah.
I've gone through so many of these that it's just like I had mentioned to you that there's a Slack bot thing called Donut, and it
Mhm.
introduces you to people in the company. And every time we bring this back, there's like a huge amount of people who take the Donut calls, and basically the bot intros you to someone, and you're supposed to set up a calendar invite. Is
Mhm.
the short of what it is. And then like a month later, everyone just stops like responding to the group chat of the Donut. It's like
Mhm.
Donut bot you and the person you got invited in a direct message, and it'll be like, "Hey, you've been selected," and no one will say anything, and the week will pass, and it'll be like, "Did you
Mhm.
like this person?" You're like, "No," and then like it repeats. Um,
Yeah. There has to be such low friction because it's awkward. It's a very awkward thing to do. So yeah,
how do we
I don't know.
solve that, Andre? If we can solve
Yes.
that, we can make millions.
Yeah. Fire people who don't have lunch with colleagues. Like mandatory requirement. I mean, it's I I don't know.
Oh, this actually also reminded me of the other thing I want to ask is,
Mm.
um, so hybrid or not, even if you're fully remote,
Mhm.
do you think that companies should do like large events like
Oh,
together or organize some sort of like team mandatory once a year like and
in
how that
person.
like how do you think that should even work? Like is it just like or I mean, this is where I feel like we need a researcher. Like, I need someone
Yeah.
to be like, you need to run an experiment of like companies who do this or companies who don't do this, and then
Yeah.
even the subset of like, do you need to have a whole company to get together, or is a good point just to start with teams getting together once a year? Um,
Yeah. I mean, so I've gotten very lucky leveraging the social interactions I've had with my team because of the connection I make with that person, not just on company business. So we had an offsite in the previous company.
yep.
We launched the product. We all went to Florida and had a very like it was meant to be a bunch of meetings. We had some debriefs and retrospectives and things, but there was a lot of socializing and after hours chat and stuff like that. And I got to interact with people who I haven't interacted before or haven't interacted with before who were on my team. And about 2 weeks later, we got back. Everyone was unwinded or like ready to get back into work. And we had an issue with infrastructure. And the only person who knew
Mhm.
how to fix this problem was someone who I'd interacted with, had a beer with, kind of chilled out. And people were like, we can't reach out to him. It's 11 p.m. there. And he mentioned when we were in the Airbnb in Florida that he typically stays up late anyway. So I was like, I might as well wing it. I've spoken to the guy, messaged and went, hey, how's it going? Total like full disclosure, this is a work message, not checking on how your evening's going. Do you perhaps have a little bit of guidance for me? This is the problem we're stuck with. And he responded to my message rather than the other people, kind of because of the rapport we'd built. And I felt like because other people were crying wolf, going, something's down, opposed to the conversations we've had where I'm like, I'm only going to reach out to people after hours. I respect the time after hours. It felt like there was some discussion we'd had that hadn't happened organically. So
Yep.
you can force that by having people in the same room and getting that information out, at least until we figure out how to mimic this. Because there's certain conversations you can't have. Maybe the co-working stream did lend itself to having these conversations that were sort of parallel, like finding out what hobbies the person has
Yep.
or like what interests they have. But I would love to know how well companies do when they have these physical offsites.
Yeah, and see, this is where I was gonna say I think it's hard, and why I said remote companies will end up kind of winning out, or
Mhm.
fully remote companies will end up becoming the winner.
Mm.
Is because you're stuck. Like, think about it. Think about the additional cost of doing something like that. And you could say, Corey, they're saving all this money with you being remote.
Offices,
And it's
yeah.
like, no, because most of those companies signed into 5 to 10-year leases for
Yeah.
those
Or they own
employees.
the premises.
Yeah, or
anyway.
yeah, they own the building.
Mhm.
And it's not exactly like we're in a hot market to buy up commercial real estate
Well,
right now when everyone is going
exactly.
remote.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of companies I feel like who are pinched where they're like, well, we wish we could do that for our employees, but we're still paying for everyone's desk.
Exactly. Yeah, they've still got all of this time. And then the other question is, at what scale should those things happen? When are they beneficial? When aren't they? If you have a team of 5 people and you're working together closely, and if your virtual interactions are going well, you have weekly socials, you've chatted enough with a person, you've been on enough ops calls. And weirdly enough, those ops calls that last 10 to like 14 hours are the ones where you also find out about people. Like, I've had great social interactions with people under the shittiest conditions because you're there for a long time. You're going through
Yep.
shit with this person. You have conversations. They tell you, like, it starts with, hold on one sec, I just need to go grab something. They go quiet for 5 minutes. After hour 3, you find out what they've been doing is like turning the beef brisket that they're smoking outside, and now they're humanized. Now, like, you would have seen the kids if they're in a like open space, because 12 hours is a damn
Yep.
long time, and all of those things happen. So getting together with a team of 4 people and being like, let's do an offsite. Cool. We're going drinking and talking about the same stuff. If you do it for like the greater team, now there's maybe more benefit. But if you do a company wide, let's all get together and have a dinner thing, like at the office, maybe there's not that much value there and the return is not that high. So
I was going to say that I weirdly now think that conferences are going to make a very strong.
yeah,
My big moment in the camera goes on.
there we go. It couldn't take it.
Conferences are going to make a very big comeback.
Yes.
Because most companies already have a learning budget.
Yes.
You could pair up your teams to go to the same conference.
Yep.
You all have a reason to go somewhere now. It is not like a indirect expense of being like, we have to get the whole team or the whole company to go out to Y location just to have like a bonding intro moment.
Yeah.
It's like, actually, it's work related. Even prior to this, most companies had said conferences are good and it's a learning opportunity and we have a training budget for that. Now the side benefit here is that you get to meet the other people on your team.
Exactly. And if a conference, my opinion is, if I get sent to a conference now and it's with colleagues who I'm not interacting with regularly, the conversation could have come up pretty organically on like, should we extend our stay by a day or two and like go to this theme park that's nearby or something like that? And it becomes conference with a little bit of a work expense, partially even covered by us personally because we're doing things outside. So the company's benefiting. So I think you're 100% right. The conversation came up on one of the streams about meetups. They're going to explode as well, where it's like, hey, are you closely located? Maybe we go to this meetup or something like that for some kind of technology or whatever we're interested in.
So you heard it here.
Yes.
2023, the Corey and Andre conference on all best practices of
everything
is going to be open for tickets for your team and your fellow colleagues to come. I actually, weirdly enough, I think that's actually even good branding for a conference to say, like, come with your team, meet your team for the first time, and learn about development, DevOps, whatever it may be.
If you structured it on best practices for remote teams. There's straight up value. Like, how do we leverage this? How do we, and it could range from don't have shitty headsets to like how to do co-working, how to engage, how to present context-rich questions.
Know if it has to be like a remote focus thing. I think it could just actually be a development, but just pitched at the fact that you should send your teams here instead of an individual, because the secondary part of it is if you're hybrid, a lot of these people have never met each other, and you're essentially double dipping as a company. You get that team bonding experience that you're like, oh, it'd be nice if we could get everyone together, but they're also learning and doing relatively like training or whatever.
That is a great idea.
All right, so 2023 we're launching this. That is a great spot to end this, you know.
Awesome. I'm glad we arrived at some point. So yes, the answer is remote work is great, hybrid can be shitty, and on-prem is going to probably die.
Yeah, I don't really see a good spot for that. Like the only exception I thought was like unrelated to software. Like you're in a special, like I need access to like, you know, a lab that can deal with like viruses that can wipe out the world. You're not going to be running a home lab with that. I'm sorry. Like, you know, it's just not gonna be happening. So you're going to need access to that facility. But even then, I've seen things that aren't that severe, and people have been able to operate like smaller home labs of things that aren't deadly and whatnot. And yeah, that's it. Awesome. That is the end.
Okay.